The soft buzz of the hotel suite's espresso machine filled the quiet, broken only by the faint hum of the city below. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silk blouse draped perfectly over my shoulders, watching the early morning traffic in San Francisco inch along like toy cars. In less than an hour, I'd be stepping on stage at the International Women in Leadership Summit, the one they'd flown me across the world to headline. My phone vibrated on the marble counter. A text. Unknown number. Saw your name on the conference site.
Funny, isn't it?
You used to butcher every word you said in class. I froze. It took only a few seconds for the years to fold back on themselves, for the sting of muffled laughter and smirks to echo in my head. That voice from the past had followed me across oceans. I set my coffee down. My lipstick, a deep red I'd once been too timid to wear, caught the light as I pressed my lips together, sealing the color. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the strange satisfaction of knowing the truth they didn't. Because in 45 minutes, I wasn't just speaking. I was the keynote speaker, the one whose accent they once mocked, whose words they once dismissed. And today, the entire world would be listening. Let's see if you still laugh, I whispered to my reflection before grabbing my notes. I was 14 the first time I realized my voice could make people laugh, not because I was funny, but because I wasn't American enough. Freshman year, first week of English class. The teacher asked me to read aloud a passage from To Kill a Mockingbird. I stood up, the pages trembling slightly in my hands. My family had moved to the U.S. from Puerto Rico 3 years earlier, but the rhythm of my Spanish still lived in every English word I spoke. Atticus Finch, I said carefully, shaping each syllable. From the back of the class came a low snicker, then another. By the time I got to the second paragraph, a boy named Tyler was whispering my words in a stretched, exaggerated tone. The laughter spread like a spark catching dry leaves. I remember the way my cheeks burned, not just on the surface, but deep, like the heat had reached my bones. My throat tightened, but I kept reading, my voice quivering. That night, I slammed my bedroom door and buried my face in my pillow. My mom knocked softly, but it was my grandmother, visiting from San Juan, who came in. She carried a small velvet pouch and sat beside me. Nina, she said, brushing my hair from my face. Your voice carries the music of where you come from. Never let them steal that. She opened the pouch and placed a delicate gold pendant in my hand, a tiny microphone charm. One day, the world will hear you. And they will listen. At 14, it sounded like a fairy tale. But somewhere in my chest, beneath the shame, a spark caught fire. The next day, I didn't speak up in class. I barely did for the rest of the semester. But I listened. I studied how others spoke, not to erase myself, but to add tools to my voice. I practiced in front of the mirror, reading out loud to my grandmother when she visited, learning how to control my breathing, my pace, my tone. By the end of high school, I was speaking without trembling, but I still carried the memory of that laughter, like a scar I refused to hide. The pendant stayed with me, warm for my skin, a quiet reminder of the promise I'd made. One day, they'll hear me. College wasn't easy. I chose communications at the University of California, Berkeley, a decision that felt like volunteering to run barefoot over hot coals, considering my history with public speaking. But I was determined. I worked nights at a small cafe off Telegraph Avenue, pulling espresso shots until my hands smelled permanently of coffee grounds. By day, I sat in the back of lecture halls, taking furious notes, recording professors, and practicing my pronunciation until my roommates complained. That's when I met Maggie Lawson, a visiting lecturer who had this effortless command of the room, the kind of woman who didn't just speak, she owned her words. After class one day, she stopped me. You've got something rare, she said. Your voice sticks with people. Don't lose that trying to sound like everyone else. Her words took me straight back to my grandmother's pendant. Maggie became my mentor. She taught me more than speech. She taught me presence. How to stand so you look like you belong anywhere. How to pause so your audience leans in. How to tell a story so that every ear in the room hangs on your next sentence. My first big break came in junior year. Maggie recommended me to host a small local entrepreneurship event. It wasn't glamorous, 50 folding chairs in a library basement, but when I walked off that stage, 3 people came up and asked if I could speak at their organizations. That was the beginning. Over the next few years, I built a reputation quietly. I spoke at workshops, community colleges, and nonprofit events. I didn't post photos online. I didn't send updates to my old classmates or the people who had once ridiculed me. My work was my secret, and I liked it that way. After graduation, I took a corporate job in marketing to pay the bills. But every vacation day, every long weekend, I was somewhere else giving talks, running leadership seminars, moderating panels. My calendar filled faster than I could believe. And then the turning point. An organizer for the Women's Global Leadership Forum heard me speak at a small Los Angeles conference. 2 months later, I was on a plane to London to deliver a 20-minute talk on authentic communication in the modern world. When I stepped on that stage and looked out over hundreds of faces, CEOs, activists, journalists, I felt that same tightness in my throat I had in freshman English. Only this time, it wasn't fear. It was power. The applause at the end was like a wave crashing over me. And when the event's keynote speaker, a well-known author, told me, "You need to be doing this on a global scale," I believed her. I started booking international events, each one bigger than the last. The fees rose, the audiences grew, but my online presence stayed minimal. Let them think I was still that quiet girl from freshman year. Because one day I knew they'd see the truth, and they wouldn't be laughing. The ballroom at the Grand Hyatt in San Francisco shimmered under crystal chandeliers, each one scattering light like stars across a midnight sky. Rows of white chairs faced a towering stage framed by 2 massive LED screens. My name, Isabella Rivera, glowed in bold gold letters, followed by the title, Keynote Speaker, The Power of an Unapologetic Voice. Backstage, I paced slowly, heels clicking against the polished wood. My assistant, Julia, handed me a glass of water. 15 minutes, she said, smiling. That's when I saw them. Out in the front rows, a small group had just been seated by the ushers. I recognized them instantly. The hunched posture of Tyler, the boy who'd mocked me in freshman English, now a man in an ill-fitted suit. Next to him, Rachel, the class gossip, her hair perfectly curled but eyes scanning the room like she was making mental judgments about the centerpieces. They weren't here for me. The conference was open to business leaders, and apparently, life had placed them in seats directly in my line of sight. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a strange anticipation. The lights dimmed. A booming voice announced, "Please welcome to the stage, all the way from New York City, international keynote speaker and leadership consultant, Isabella Rivera." Applause rolled through the ballroom as I stepped into the spotlight. The stage lights were warm against my skin, the microphone cool in my hand. I scanned the audience, letting my gaze pause, just for a second, on Tyler and Rachel. Their eyes widened. I began. "I used to hate my voice," I said, my tone even steady. "When I first moved to this country, it made people laugh. It made me small. It made me want to disappear." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. But here's the thing about the parts of ourselves we're told to hide. They're often the very things that can change the world. The moment I stopped trying to erase my accent was the moment I started to find my power. I moved across the stage, weaving the story of my journey. The nights in the cafe, the guidance from my mentor, the first small stage, the leap across the ocean to speak in London. I didn't name names, but my words carried ghosts, and I knew those ghosts were hearing me loud and clear. The applause at the end was thunderous. People stood, some even wiping their eyes. As the crowd began to disperse for the networking session, I stepped off stage. I was halfway to the green room when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Isabella?" I turned. Tyler and Rachel stood there, hesitant, unsure. "That was incredible," Tyler said, his voice lower, slower than I remembered. "I don't know if you remember, but in high school—" "I remember," I said, my lips curving into a calm smile. Rachel swallowed. "We were awful."
"I'm sorry."
"I don't even know why we—" "You laughed," I said, my tone still even. because you thought different meant weak. But I'm here to tell you, different is my strength. They exchanged a glance, shame flickering across their faces. I don't expect you to make it up to me, I continued, but I hope you remember this the next time you hear a voice that doesn't sound like yours. They nodded, eyes downcast. And with that, I walked away, my heels clicking against the marble, my grandmother's pendant resting warm against my collarbone, the applause from moments ago still ringing in my ears. The gala dinner that night was a swirl of champagne flutes, clinking silverware, and murmured conversations in a dozen different accents. I sat at the center table, fielding questions from CEOs, authors, and nonprofit founders who wanted to book me for their next event. Across the room, I caught sight of Tyler and Rachel lingering by the exit, like they weren't sure whether to leave or stay. Eventually, they worked up the courage to approach. "Do you have a minute?" Rachel asked, her voice soft, almost tentative. I gestured to the empty chair beside me. "Sit." They both sat, looking more like nervous interns than the confident classmates who once ruled the high school hallways. "I meant what I said earlier," Tyler began. "We were wrong. And now, seeing what you've done, I guess I was wondering, maybe you could give me some advice? I'm struggling to get ahead in my career." There it was, the request. I set down my fork, folding my napkin neatly in my lap. "Advice I can give," I said. "But understand this, I don't help people who aren't willing to change." They both leaned in slightly. "For you, Tyler," I continued, "I want you to mentor someone who's just starting out. Someone different from you. Listen to them. Learn from them. Treat their voice like it matters." He nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "And Rachel," I said, turning to her, "you've always been good at connecting with people. Use that gift to lift someone up, not tear them down. Volunteer. Give your time to something bigger than yourself." Rachel's eyes shimmered with something between guilt and gratitude. "Here's the truth," I added, my voice steady but warm. "I don't carry anger toward you anymore. But I also don't let people back into my life unless they've earned that space. You don't get to skip the work just because you said sorry." They were silent for a moment. Then Tyler spoke. "Fair." "That's fair." I smiled faintly. "Good. Because if you follow through, I'll help you. Introduce you to people. Teach you what I know. But only after I see proof that you've changed." It was strange. I expected to feel smug in that moment, maybe even triumphant. Instead, I felt lighter, like setting the terms was less about power and more about protecting the woman I had become. They both promised to start right away. Whether they would or not, I didn't know. But the conditions were set, and I wouldn't bend them. As they left, I turned back to the table of industry leaders waiting for my attention. My assistant leaned over and whispered, "Everything okay?" I nodded, picking up my wine glass. Everything's exactly how it should be. 2 months later, an email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "Following your advice, Tyler." I clicked it. Inside were photos of him sitting across from a young woman in a small office, both of them smiling over a notebook filled with scribbles. He explained that he'd started mentoring her through a community program. She was a first-generation college student, just like I had been. A week later, Rachel sent a message too. She joined a nonprofit that helped immigrant women start small businesses. Attached was a picture of her standing in front of a table filled with handmade jewelry, laughing with the women who made it. For the first time, I believed their apologies. That weekend, I flew to San Juan to visit my grandmother. She was older now, her hair silver and her hands softer, but her eyes still held that steady warmth that could melt stone. We sat in her garden, the scent of jasmine floating through the air. I told her about San Francisco, about the Keynote, about the classmates who had once mocked me and now came to me for help. She listened, smiling, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When I finished, she reached forward and touched the gold microphone pendant resting against my collarbone. "I told you," she said, her voice a gentle melody, "one day, the world would hear you." I laughed softly, blinking back tears. "And you were right, Abuela. They're listening now." Later that night, I stood on the balcony of her small apartment, looking out over the city lights. The air was warm, filled with the distant sound of music and laughter. I thought about the journey, The sting of that first classroom humiliation, the long years of work, the moments of doubt, and the quiet victories no one saw. I realized that every step, every stumble, every mocking laugh had shaped me into the woman who now stood here, strong, steady, and unafraid to take up space. I touched the pendant again, its surface smooth from years against my skin. They once mocked my voice. Now, when I spoke, the world leaned in.